Hey everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. It is 11 here for me, and happy to see everyone. Let me check the chat here. So, quick disclaimer on this, and I'll put this in the chat as well. But quick disclaimer, we had a little mix up in communication today, and I've got people working on my roof. So if you hear some loud bangs and things like that, that is what's going on. And if it gets really, really bad, I can reschedule this. So I think I'm just asking if you all can be really loud in chat and let me know if it sounds bad. So we're trying this noise suppression thing to see how it works. Let me share my screen here. Awesome. So happy to share this presentation with y'all. I did give this live once in Central Oregon. I'm also going to give a very condensed version of it in the Bay Area next week. So would love to have your participation as well. If I say anything you disagree with, anything you agree with. Presentation itself is probably like half hour. So we'll have lots of time to bike shed on the fun things. Okay. Yeah, it looks like we're good. Cool. Yeah, I'm actually more nervous about how it sounds than giving the actual talk. So cool. Thank you. All right. So let's get started. So this is just a little bit about me. I think a lot of you all know me just because I'm pretty active in the Believe in Serverless community. But if you want to connect, if we're not already connected, I've got all my stuff on my website, danielleheberling.xyz. If you want to connect on Twitter/X or LinkedIn, I would love to hear what you're working on. And that's actually also on topic. And by day, I am a software engineering manager and I work in healthcare. We are building on top of a legacy system with a lot of AWS serverless type of technologies. So it's a super fun adventure and we're learning a lot. Cool. So just kind of a quick overview of why I give this talk. I am a remote worker, and for that reason, I'm very active in virtual communities such as Believe in Serverless. Also, for better or for worse, I am very active on tech, Twitter, LinkedIn, things like that. And one thing that I noticed more recently, really, maybe within the past 6 to 8 months, was a lot of people being really negative about serverless. And personally, my opinion is, I think that's fine. We're all entitled to our opinions. But some of the things that folks were saying directly contradicted a lot of things that I've seen in practice. And also, I think, social media, you can lose some nuance. So I wanted to write a talk covering 4 high-level topics that I've seen discussed a lot, some truths and some not so truth, and kind of give you my biased opinion on it. And again, we may disagree. I think the whole point of this is really to just start a conversation. And our goal should not be to convince each other that each other's way is right, just to talk and hopefully learn from each other. So I'm going to pull up a few of these posts here just to kind of give you an idea of some that I was seeing. And just big disclaimer, this isn't meant to shame folks or anything like that, just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm seeing here. So this one was on X. Sam Lambert said, "It's amazing how quickly serverless became synonymous with, I don't want to think anymore. I just expect everything to work without having to understand it." And I'm going to hold off on giving my opinion. I'm just going to show these to you. Here's another one. I actually know Brandon. He's a good guy. But this is one thing that he wrote about his opinion and experiences with serverless. And he hits a lot of points here. Biggest myth of serverless is you just focus on business logic. It's a baseless marketing ploy, but you do still need to worry about all this other stuff. And then on top of that, you also need to worry about cold start and your code size and your duration. So I hate that I have to do this in 2024, but before I get into like the topics and my opinions, I'm going to give you my definition of what serverless means to me, just because there are many definitions out there, just so you kind of have a baseline of what I mean when I say serverless. Again, you may disagree or have a differing opinion. That is totally good with me. But yeah, just get a baseline here. So I've got 4 points. First point is, if something is purely serverless, you don't have servers to provision or manage. I think pretty straightforward, I would hope. Serverless should scale with usage. So the more users that you have of your app will scale up. And then as users trickle off, maybe in the middle of the night or during a time where you're not having as much traffic, it should scale down. Serverless should have availability and fault tolerance built in as part of the managed service that you're using. So you're not thinking about, which availability zone do I put this in or things like that. It just automatically handles that for you. And the fourth part, this one's a little spicy. There are some vendors and some individuals that no longer believe that this is part of the definition of serverless. However, I'm a little bit of a purist, and I keep this one in. Never pay for idle. So if you don't have any usage, if things are not getting traffic, I don't think you should be charged. So there shouldn't be like a monthly minimum or things like that. And I got one more thing here. Footnote. Serverless is more than functions as a service. I do believe that functions as a service, such as like AWS Lambda, Cloudflare workers, things like that, that is a huge part of serverless, but serverless is a lot more than that. One thing that I noticed in some of these posts is people were talking about them like they were a one-to-one thing. And I've got 2 articles for you here. Another AWS serverless hero named Ben Kehoe. If you haven't talked to him, really great guy. I believe he's also in the Discord as well. So definitely chat with him. He wrote a fair amount on the serverless mindset. If you've seen some people talking about that. I'm not sure if he's the original person that coined it, but there's a lot of talk about that. I'm going to link this blog post. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is this also contributes to how I think about serverless and what is serverless. It's a mindset. Do you want to be spending all your time and your team's time managing infrastructure and servers? Or would you want to offload that to a vendor that you pay so you can focus more on the business logic? And that's kind of part of what he's referring to. A big part is the focus. Where do you want your developers to be focusing? So heavily recommend you read that. Really great article. And then he wrote another good one. Link this one too. about viewing serverless as a spectrum. So when marketers came in and started kind of co-opting the word serverless, and it meant, many different things, kind of similar to how it looks now. He wrote this blog post saying that serverless is not binary. Something is not serverful or serverless. There are some things in the middle on the spectrum. And I think that's also a nice way to look at it as well. Because if you go back to my 4 points, it might only match maybe 3 out of the 4. It might only match 1 out of the 4. Personally, I would call AWS Fargate serverless, but that violates my point 1 of no servers to provision. So I view it as, on the spectrum. If it's more towards serverless or more towards serverful. I like thinking about it that way. So here's some high-level topics that I've seen, and would love to hear if you all have any others that you've seen hotly debated. Just kind of discussion at the end, how maybe we as a community can contribute to educating folks. But yeah, topics that I've seen a lot are cold starts, vendor lock-in. A lot of people on Twitter talking about how serverless is complicated. And then also a lot of people talking about how it's expensive. So let's start with cold starts. This could easily be its own talk. AJ Stivenberg has given many AWS reInvent talks just on this topic. So if you do want to dig in deeper, I would heavily recommend those. But let's get to it. So this is a quote from a former manager that I used to work for. We tried Lambda once, but we couldn't use it because of the cold starts. And this is also something that I've seen reflected online on social media of people just trying to use Lambda or functions as a service. And for whatever reason, it was just a deal breaker and degraded their, working of their app to the point where they couldn't use it. And the reason why I bring up my manager in particular is not to shame him, more to say the opposite. I think this man was very brilliant. Before he became a manager, he was principal engineer for many years. Very, very smart guy. And the main reason why I bring this up is because it's people of all ability and skill levels that I've seen that seem to have these thoughts. So we'll get back to that in a sec. But with cold starts, and also just in general, some unsolicited advice that I always like to offer is when you're using a managed service, you should learn how the service that you're using works. Learn what that service is good at, learn what it's not so good at, and then you should use it for what it's good at. Seems like maybe common sense, but sometimes it's easy to lose the forest from the trees. But that's kind of what I always come back to. So let's follow my advice. Let's chat real briefly about what a cold start is. And this is taken from the AWS Lambda docs. Really good graphic if you want to dig deeper. But yeah, essentially, when your Lambda function gets invoked, it needs to do these 4 high-level things. Download your code, start a new execution environment, then it will execute your initialization code. This is the code that's outside of your handler. So things like if you need to initialize an environment variable, maybe if you need to initialize an AWS SDK client, things like that. And then finally, it will execute your handler code. And what's considered a cold start is the time that it takes for step 1 and step 2. And then the great part about it, in my opinion, the great part about it, maybe it's not some people's opinion, is Lambda will do these 4 things. It executes your code, and then it checks to see if it's still getting requests. If it is, it will reuse that execution environment. So then it doesn't need to go through step 1 and 2, and it's not considered a cold start. Sometimes people call them a warm start. I don't really know what the official terminology is, but yeah, that's what I really like about it. So, some things that can affect cold starts. The runtime that you pick. So this is going to be your programming language. If you are using a compiled language like .NET or Java, those are much heavier languages to provision. So it will take a little longer for that step one part, the start a new execution environment part. Here, if you can, if cold starts are a real issue for you, if you want to shave some time off, you could choose a runtime such as Python or Node.js. Another thing that affects cold starts is package size. So this is the amount of data that needs to be loaded to run your code. I think best practice here is to make it as small as you possibly can. If you have any dependencies that you aren't using, delete them. That can help your cold start. It's really a best practice in general, in my opinion. And then finally, this last one is semi-contradictory, but stick with me for a sec. So startup logic. So these are like the connections and the initializations that are defined outside of your handler code. So this is actually really step 3. But the reason why I included it as a way that can make your cold starts a little longer is because the first time it needs to initialize, it's going to take a little bit of time potentially, depending on how much you have and what it's doing. I would consider it a trade-off. I still think it's best practice to initialize your AWS SDK clients outside of the handler. I'm just bringing this up because it is something that can potentially affect cold start times. This is also good advice as well. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, just moved to Florida or something. But yeah, let's get back to my manager. So following my own advice, I learned how cold starts work. And then I asked him, how are you using Lambda? What does your code look like? And his answer to me was they were trying to load a monolithic Nest.js GraphQL API. And I took a look at it. I don't remember the exact bundle size. I can maybe try to fact check that. But I do remember the bundle size was rather large and it was doing a lot of stuff. Nest.js is a great framework, but it also has a lot of dependencies as well, depending on how you use it. So I explained to him, it makes perfect sense to me that you're having cold starts because of this. And he was kind enough to listen to me. But ultimately, you can't win them all. The team had already moved that to Fargate. It worked well. It worked fine. I would consider that part a win. The one loss, I would say, is a few weeks later, I heard him repeating the same refrain of, we tried Lambda once, but couldn't use it because of the cold starts, even after I thought I educated him. But, you can't win them all. Sometimes people have their opinions made. I still do respect him. And this is from Claude Shams of Memento. He wrote this in 2022. But I've heard him say this other times as well. We often bike shed on Lambda cold start times without appreciating how long it takes for auto-scaling to kick in and for full VMs to warm up when running outside of the Lambda world. Cold starts are graceful degradations when compared against rejected connections. Lambda is just beautiful. So to paraphrase that, I would say I agree with that. Cold starts are a very real thing that you do need to be aware of because there are some cases where it really can affect your app. But when compared to where we came from, graceful degradation is my opinion. And personally, I mean, this is my bias. I will say, I don't think there were a few times where cold start gave me an issue, mostly with like a synchronous API that had to be on all the time. But yeah, in general, it was very negligible. But your opinion may be different. So cool. So let's get on to vendor lock-in. So definition from Cloudflare, just because I really liked their definition. And I'll just jump straight to some points that I have about vendor lock-in. I find it fascinating because vendor lock-in, we always kind of use those three words together, or at least people in my bubble seem to. But if you think about lock-in exists almost everywhere. Lock-in can go beyond your cloud and your hosting choices. Another example is the programming language that you pick. For example, if you pick Node.js, you would be locked into Node.js's ecosystem and the tools that are built for it. I don't really hear people talking about that a lot as a big concern. But again, maybe I live in a bubble. Another example of lock-in that I see is databases. Sometimes I see people talking about this, but much less than vendor lock-in. So I think I'll just jump straight to my opinion. My opinion here is it's a trade-off. Everything is a trade-off. So vendor lock-in is something that's real and exists, but sometimes the trade-offs are worth it. And I don't know this Jonathan Baker guy, but he writes some pretty fantastic tweets. And this is one that I wholeheartedly agree with. Some people see vendor lock-in. Other people like me see a rich and well-integrated ecosystem of products and integrations that make solving business problems so much easier. So I think to jump back to like maybe a consumer example, like if you're thinking about like the Apple ecosystem or the Windows ecosystem, Apple can be great because, you know, your iPad, your phone, your watch, they're all built to work together. You don't really have to think about it. But one person's great, well-integrated ecosystem could be another person's, you know, lock-in. I want to go beyond what Apple allows me to do. So it really is a trade-off. And my unsolicited advice here is to talk with your team about what you'd like to accomplish and just kind of what your first principles are, prioritize everything, and decide together. Yeah, Alex brings up a great point. Yeah, I have seen this talk. I think he gave this talk a few times at reInvent about various dimensions of lock-ins. Yeah, he does it a much better service than me. So yeah, would highly recommend checking that out as well. So pros and cons to everything, really just a trade-off, I think. My advice is use whatever your team thinks is best. I have my own preferences, obviously, towards the managed side and serverless, but I don't think we should be hating on people who maybe want to go the other way. All right. Let's do serverless is complicated. So this is a good one. So this is my friend Matt. I believe he's an AWS community builder. He posted this somewhat harsh take in 2022. Despite it being somewhat harsh, I generally agree with most of it. He says people who complain about serverless being complicated satisfy one or more of the following criteria without exception. One, they've never actually used serverless techniques. Two, they've not had to deal with on-premises or cloud server-based deployments. Three, they're trying to sell you something. And I think number three number 3 is really key. Online, and especially like in text communication, it's really easy to miss nuance. I kind of get a little obsessive sometimes in terms of wanting to see, what are people's motivations for posting something, especially if it's like super polarizing. And I will click into their profiles if I don't know them and kind of look around a little. And a lot of times, number 3 is heavily true. So before you get like angry and start arguing with people, that might be a good thing to look at. But also number 1, I would also add an addendum here of maybe they haven't used serverless techniques recently. Another big pro of serverless is, the managed service aspect of it, is the people that build the managed service are constantly working to improve it. So if we go back to like Lambda cold starts, if you compare a Lambda cold start from like 2017 to 2024, way different. They've done a ton of work to make it less. And I wonder if in some cases, sometimes when people jump online and complain, they just maybe haven't used it recently. There's that possibility too. So this is a typical serverless architecture. Personally, to me, this looks kind of small, but I'm also biased to like serverless. Yeah, this is huge, I think. Serverless definitely forces you to think about aspects that are hidden or overseen in more traditional architectures. Yeah, just putting something out here like this without context is just like, oh, wow, that's a lot of boxes. Yeah, you pretty much made my point here. So let's dive in a little further, actually. So I got this idea from a blog post by the Burning Monk, Jan Trey. He's also in our Discord as well. I'll link his article. You should definitely take the time to read it, but I'll give you like a quick, 50-cent tour of it. Let's take a quick look at an architecture diagram of a REST API for a web app that's built in a serverful way. So on AWS, we'd have the application load balancer to EC2 to RDS. So only 3 boxes, definitely way easier than this, right? So if you dig a little deeper beyond the architecture diagram, there are some moving parts, to Alex's point, which I heavily agree with. So in this case, like if you zoom into the EC2 instance, you might see that it's an Express.js server. You'll also see that there are various functions and routes within there. That's not present in the original architecture diagram. And then same thing with the relational database service. You'll be talking to many different tables within that RDS instance or cluster. So if you look at how this might look in AWS Serverless, you might see something like this. So API gateway to multiple Lambda functions to multiple DynamoDB tables. And I think the big benefit here is all the moving parts are exposed in the architecture diagrams. Sure, you do have to dive into the Lambda code, potentially. But yeah, for the most part, all the moving parts are exposed. And this is my bias towards being pro serverless. Your experience and opinion might be different, but I really love that I don't have to have like a second secret mind map of everything that's in here. So I'm going to do the senior engineer thing of it depends. Yeah. Yeah, this is actually a pretty simple example. So can't fit all that on a nice slide. So, but yeah, I really think, being complicated or not being complicated really is in the eye of the beholder. It really depends on the individual's, mindset, their past experience, their past expertise. And Alan Helton, who's also in the Believe in Serverless community, he always likes to say, don't confuse complexity with unfamiliarity. And I'll be honest and admit that that lives rent-free in my head constantly. Anytime I'm doing something and I'm thinking, geez, this is really hard, I just like hear his voice in my head of, is it actually hard or are you just not familiar with it? And I really like that approach to things. It's up to you if you'd like to adopt it or not, though. And this is another thing that also kind of sticks in my head a little bit, is someone's happiness generally will equal, what their expectation is, minus the reality. So if we think, oh, serverless is going to be this easy or, this hard, and then the reality is like, it's actually this hard, that's going to make me unhappy and be negative. I think about this a lot, more from maybe like a product standpoint. But if you set super high expectations, sometimes maybe you are setting people up to be disappointed. So I try to be careful when I say things like, oh, just simply serverless is easy. Just focus on business logic. It is easier in certain ways, but in other ways, you got to think differently. So let's get to the last one. Serverless is expensive. And you don't have to go too far on social media to find really heartbreaking posts like this one. This is someone who is using Vercel, and the, I guess, good part is their application got a lot more traffic than they were expecting. But the bad part was because it's pay per use, and they got a lot more use than they were expecting, their bill was very, very high. And yeah, you can see, man, actually, I've seen entire websites dedicated to people posting things like this. Yeah, really, really heartbreaking. So I'll tell you my thoughts on this. Not on this specific person, but just in general. Personally, I think with great power comes great responsibility. I believe, I have seen serverless can scale super high. But also with that, if you have a lot of high unexpected traffic, serverless is generally going to be pay per use depending on what service you're using. So more usage is going to be more of a bill. So I think my thought is to generally think about this up front. This is really good advice for anything. I think you probably should keep pricing in mind regardless if it's serverless or not. One thing that I have found though is sometimes pricing can be make or break for what you or your company want to spend. And with serverless, sometimes that might gear towards you choose another managed service instead of the other one. But yeah, I also think too that vendors could do better in terms of some of them do have off switches. Some of them have off switches that you have to enable. They're not enabled by default. Some of them don't have off switches at all. So I think when you're architecting a new system, those are really good questions to ask and dig around the vendor's docs. And if they don't have an off switch, have some sort of plan B for how to quickly shut things off, especially if you're doing like a solo project. Yeah, we don't want anyone to get a surprise bill. But yeah, I would tend to say, yeah, in general, I do feel like serverless is rather cheap. But yeah, just be careful of those surprise bills, I think. But yeah, serverless costs include a lot of things. beyond, just the bare metal server that you might be paying for at a, VPS or something like that. So sometimes, like if you do compare, just price compare serverless to a non-serverless thing, sometimes the serverless thing will look way more expensive, but it also includes more. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then, of course, I had to discuss this. I'll link this in the chat. Oh no, it's not working. My link. Yeah, they got rid of it. Interesting. Okay. So I'll just tell you about it. Essentially, Prime Video, aka, Amazon Prime Video, they had this audio video monitoring service that they used. And essentially, they wrote this blog post in 2023. This audio video monitoring service was once a series of microservices, and they mentioned AWS step functions, and AWS Lambda was backing a lot of it. And they found that they had a lot of high throughput and that it was costing them a lot. So they decided to re-architect it to be a monolith and also to be serverful. So I believe they mentioned EC2. And they were able to reduce their costs by 90%. And the reason why I bring this up is because serverless haters online love to talk about this. And I think a lot of them are surprised when I reply back saying, I agree, if they have the means to, build and maintain those servers, if they can get a much better deal with their traffic patterns and things like that using EC2 and save this much, go for it. I'm all for, best tool for the job. Yeah, that's weird that link doesn't work anymore. But yeah, this is totally true. Know your tools and infrastructure and just how to use it. So I'll do some final thoughts here. So I think about this a lot. In general, I think just complaining about something without action behind it is not very pragmatic towards getting things to move in the direction that you want. Personally, I think it's important to, try to be the change that you'd like to see in the world. Going online and just complaining, it might be good for, just kind of get out some frustration. But overall, it won't really change much. And I'm the type of person where I want to change something. So I think doing something is a lot more impactful than just complaining. And some ideas that I have for being able to do something, if you have a bad experience with a serverless thing, you could give vendors feedback. If you run into a bug or, an issue or a missing feature, try to find the communication channels that the vendors have and speak directly to them to give them that feedback. A lot of them are very appreciative of that. Another thing that I've loved seeing people do is maybe they'll have an issue with their workflow. And then they go out and build a tool to solve that problem. And then they open source it on GitHub for other people to use. That's another thing you could do. And then another idea that I have, I do this all the time, admittedly, is I go out and I build things and I stumble all over myself constantly, but I learn a lot. And then I take those learnings and make it, either a talk or a blog post or, podcast, something like that, just in the hope that, I don't really care about going viral. I care about, one person consumes that content and then they don't make the same mistake I did. And, it's hard to make a lot of change as an individual. And I think my main goal is, just try to leave my little corner of the world better than I found it. And this one is huge. I'm still working on this one. I think we as humans like love to be right. And a lot of it turns into a game of how can I convince someone to, think how I think and do what I do. And then it turns into people yelling at each other. Sometimes you're wrong. And just be willing to listen to other people that may have opposing viewpoints and be willing to change your mind if that new information is compelling enough. This has helped me grow a ton. And again, I'm still working on this. I think it's probably all of us. And there's a lot of ways to climb the hill. I hinted at this already, but that's the beautiful thing about tech. There's so many different ways to do the same thing. We all have our talents and our gifts and, what we prefer, what we don't prefer. Try to not view your way as, the one true path that everyone must follow. Acknowledge that sometimes people will take another path, and that's fine. And Benjamin Pyle, who's also in the Believe in Serverless Discord, said it much more eloquently than myself. So I put this up here. Best thing people should be doing is helping others to get better in the direction that works for them, not spending energy trying to convince them that their way is better. And I wholeheartedly agree with this. So finally, after, kind of arguing with people online and just generally being really frustrated about a lot of these, serverless myths and half-truths that I've seen, I took to LinkedIn and I wrote this. I wanted to keep it professional because it's LinkedIn. But I said, in this day and age of social media, everyone's trying to loudly become an influencer. Reality is none of us know everything, and we're all just figuring it out as we go. I think it's a disservice to people who consume your content or, like your posts, to represent yourself as an authoritative expert when you aren't. I'm immediately suspicious of folks who speak in absolutes. And I've got a lot of respect for people who use these platforms to share their ideas, but are also open to new perspectives and learning. So I will leave you with that. Good luck out there. Let's do our best to try to make tech a friendlier place. We can disagree, but doesn't mean we need to scream at each other. And I think I said this before, but I definitely welcome, polite, engaged conversation, whether we agree or disagree. At the end, we may still disagree, but I just hope that we can have a dialogue started and maybe learn something from each other. So let me take my slides off. Yeah, these are huge. Yeah, for life as well. Yeah, it's taken me a while to get here because I know when I was in my 20s, it feels good to be right, but sometimes you aren't. And maybe we need to value, being kind to people. So, yeah, takes time and lots of failures to learn. Especially with AWS. Yeah, definitely. I have had a lot of IAM issues, and those are fun to troubleshoot. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, that's all I had. Does anyone have any questions or discussions? It's awkward when I'm hosting myself. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you all for tuning in. I'm biased, but I really love the Believe in Serverless community, and let's keep up the great work of spreading the serverless gospel, but also seeing what we can do to learn from other folks that may or may not agree with us. So, thank you all. I think I'm going to end this stream now. Bye.